"Useless old woman," my son sneered, throwing me out of my own home after my husband's funeral. Phlegm-choked rage fueled me to this dusty, abandoned warehouse, the only thing Arthur left me. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I was 67 years old when I lost everything, only to gain the world. The funeral of my husband, Arthur, had been a blur of expensive flowers and crocodile tears. But it was the will reading 2 weeks later that truly killed me. Arthur, my partner of 42 years, had been a financial genius. He was the silent architect of an empire built on foresight and calculated risk. Yet the estate he left was divided. Dominic, our only son, now 41 and already a shark in his own right, received the shimmering penthouse overlooking Central Park and the bulk of the liquid investment portfolio, the visible wealth. And me? I received an obscure deed to a property described only as Lot 1420, Industrial District, one warehouse and all contents therein. A warehouse. Mother? Dominic had scoffed, his face a mask of condescension barely hidden by his tailored suit. Dad really thought you were capable of managing industrial property? It's probably full of old tax files and broken office furniture. Just liquidate it for whatever you can get. That night, the night of the reading, Dominic had ordered me to leave the penthouse so his fiancée could immediately begin renovations. "I need this place gutted, Mom. You'll only be in the way." His words weren't a request. They were an eviction. His lack of grace, his utter entitlement, was a physical punch to my gut. It was the moment I realized the soft, compassionate boy I had raised was long gone, replaced by a calculating man who valued property over people. Carrying the small, worn leather valise Arthur had given me years ago, and clutching the strange, heavy iron key, I left. I didn't go to a friend, I drove. Drove 300 miles south until the industrial parks gave way to the hazy light of the coast. I found Lot 1420 using the GPS on my phone, a solitary, nondescript corrugated steel box, locked tight. The key was cumbersome and stiff. It took 3 tries before the rusty mechanism grudgingly yielded. A blast of dry, cool, conditioned air hit me. Not the musty heat of a forgotten building. I used the flashlight on my phone, the beam cutting through the profound, absolute darkness. Inside, the space was vast, spotless, and silent. Not a single file box. Not a broken chair. Just 3 towering shapes, each covered by a custom-fitted, museum-quality gray canvas shroud. They stood like silent monoliths, waiting. My heart hammered against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm of fear and disbelief. Why? Why would Arthur keep this from me? I reached out and grasped the edge of the nearest shroud. The fabric was heavy, smooth, smelling faintly of fine leather and polish. With a quick, desperate pull, I dragged the canvas away. The air escaped my lungs in a sharp gasp, illuminated by the weak beam of my phone. The first shape emerged, a 1964 Aston Martin DB5, its classic silhouette unmistakable, the silver birch paint gleaming with a depth that defied the low light. It was immaculate, perfect. The kind of car you only see in auctions, valued in the rarefied air of multi-million-dollar collectibles. Tears, hot and stinging, finally breached my defenses. I hadn't cried this much since Arthur's diagnosis years ago. This wasn't just a car. It was a ghost of Arthur, a secret whispered only to me. I hurried to the next 2 shrouds. Under the second was a 1957 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing, the doors soaring upward like wings, a mechanical sculpture worth as much or more than the Aston. The third, a 1966 Ferrari 275 GTB4, its curves aggressive, predatory, and achingly beautiful. Arthur had left me a private, climate-controlled, state-of-the-art vault containing 3 of the most desirable vintage cars on the planet. I estimated their collective value, conservatively, at over $12 million. On the wall, next to what looked suspiciously like a state-of-the-art security panel, was an envelope addressed simply, "To Eleanor. When you are ready." I fumbled for the light switch. The entire space flooded with recessed LED lighting. This was no mere storage facility, but a sanctuary. A shrine to mechanical excellence and, as I would soon learn, forethought. I sank onto a leather-upholstered bench and carefully opened the letter, my hands trembling. Arthur's familiar, elegant script seemed to leap off the heavy parchment. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began, "if you are reading this, I am already gone, and you have discovered my final, most crucial act of love. Please forgive the secrecy, my darling. 6 years ago, when the doctors gave me the diagnosis, I didn't panic. I planned. I had to ensure your absolute freedom." He explained his silence. He explained his deep, gnawing concern over the man Dominic had become. "Our son has a brilliant mind, Eleanor, but his heart has hardened. He sees the world only in terms of acquisition and leverage. I have watched him speak to you, Eleanor, with a lack of respect I find unconscionable. I could not, in good conscience, leave you vulnerable to his eventual dominance." He went on to detail the purpose of the worthless warehouse. "The cars, my dear, are the anchor. They are registered under a private holding trust, now solely in your name, which also includes the deeds to the income properties and investment portfolios that fund your independence. Dominic received the glittering symbols of status, but you received the lasting security." My vision blurred. Arthur hadn't punished me. He had protected me. He had seen the future I was too loyal to confront. He ended with instructions, a concealed safe behind a framed photograph of our first date, containing the financial documentation and, most importantly, a cryptic phrase that would govern my relationship with our son. The test of character. I spent the rest of the night in that brilliantly lit sanctuary, reading documents, running my hand along the smooth fenders of the Aston Martin, and mourning the man who had loved me so completely, even in his final plans. Arthur Vance had not just left me a fortune. He had given me back my agency. He had given me the ammunition to fight a war I hadn't even known was coming. But first I had to secure my base. The paperwork revealed another, more personal asset, a private coastal retreat in Monterey. It was time to disappear, just as Arthur had intended. 2 days later, I was gone. Not just from the city, but from the life Dominic expected me to lead. I had notified Attorney Madison, the brilliant woman Arthur had instructed in his letter to reach out to, who now oversaw the complex network of trusts. She was initially startled, but quickly impressed by the meticulous nature of Arthur's planning. "Mrs. Vance," she'd said, her voice dry, "your husband wasn't a man. He was a master strategist. Every single asset is shielded. Dominic would spend millions in legal fees and still walk away empty-handed. I drove the Ferrari 275 GTB4 out of the warehouse, a discreet operation managed by Mr. Graham, the car expert Arthur had named in the letter. Mr. Graham, a man who looked like he belonged on the set of a vintage car documentary, treated the vehicles with reverence. He provided me with a temporary anonymous vehicle to drive to my new sanctuary, the Monterey Coastal Retreat. The retreat was perfect. It wasn't grand like the penthouse, but it was nestled on a quiet bluff overlooking the crashing Pacific waves. It was cozy, filled with light, and possessed the quiet elegance Arthur always preferred over Dominic's obsession with ostentatious displays. It immediately felt like mine, not a place Arthur had merely prepared, but a home he had designed for my soul. I established a routine built on simple pleasures I had long neglected. Mornings were for coffee in the garden, inhaling the crisp, salty air and listening to the cries of the gulls. Afternoons were spent on Arthur's detailed financial ledgers, working with Attorney Madison to understand the intricacies of the income properties. I was surprised to find that I didn't hate the work. The methodical nature of the finances, the proof of my secure future, was strangely soothing. Arthur had set up the system so perfectly that I only needed to make high-level decisions, not manage daily chaos. I was finally learning the true value of independence. On the 4th day of my new life, as I was sitting in the sun-drenched garden, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Dominic Vance. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the cool, slightly bitter taste of my coffee. I no longer had to rush to answer his demands. I let it ring once, twice, before finally tapping the screen. "Hello, Dominic," I said, ensuring my voice was low, calm, and utterly neutral. No warmth, no eagerness. "Mom, where are you?" His voice was a whip crack of impatience and thinly veiled anxiety. That familiar tone, demanding and self-centered, jarred the peace of the garden. "Aunt Helen said you haven't been staying with her, and you're not answering at the apartment either. The penthouse is half gutted. I need to know where you put the insurance papers." I felt a slight, almost imperceptible hardening around my mouth. "I'm taking some time for myself, Dominic. I found a place to stay. What does that even mean? What place? You can't just disappear. I need those papers." He sounded genuinely panicked, which was a new and unsettling sound from him. Panic meant he was losing control. "I'm not discussing my whereabouts right now," I replied, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. It felt foreign, yet deeply satisfying. "Was there something specific you needed that warrants this level of hysteria?" A dramatic pause. Then the shift. His tone dropped into the smooth, practiced cadence I recognized instantly, his business negotiation voice. Calculated and manipulative. "Actually, yes. I have been going through Dad's papers much more thoroughly, the ones you didn't bother sorting out, apparently, and I found some disturbing references." My heart gave a nervous flutter, but my face remained placid. Disturbing references? References to additional investments that weren't covered in the will reading. Notes about meetings with financial advisors I don't recognize. Some cryptic comments about securing future assets against a volatile market shift. I think there might be accounts or properties we don't know about yet. "Mom, and I thought you might know something." "Your father handled most of our finances," I said. A deliberate half-truth. If there were additional assets, I'm sure Attorney Thompson, the one who read the will, would have mentioned them. "Maybe," Dominic said, sounding unconvinced, the skepticism heavy in his tone. "Thompson only deals with the visible portfolio. Dad was clearly doing things off the books. I'm telling you, I think he had a secret stash. And you're hiding." The accusation didn't sting. It felt like a tactical advantage. He was hunting, but he was hunting blind. "Listen, when are you coming back to the city? We need to discuss this in person. I've got the penthouse torn apart for renovations, but we could meet somewhere neutral." "I'm not sure when I'll be back," I replied, honestly. "I need this time away to process everything that's happened." His frustration boiled over, palpable even through the distance. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just wander off without telling anyone where you are? What if there's an emergency? What if something happens to you?" The irony made me almost laugh out loud. His concern was merely a cloak for his desire to control. "I am perfectly fine, Dominic," I countered, my voice steely. "I am not wandering, and I am not alone. I am simply taking the space and security I need to process Arthur's death." This isn't up for debate. The silence on the line was thick, punctuated only by my own calm, steady breathing. The game had begun, and I was holding the winning hand. "This isn't like you," Dominic said, the impatience in his voice replaced by a subtle, calculated note of accusation. "First, Dad leaves you practically nothing in the official will, a joke of a warehouse. Then you disappear without a word. People will talk, Mom. They'll start asking what happened to Eleanor Vance, the society fixture." I almost choked on a silent laugh. "Let them talk, Dominic." The garden felt suddenly brighter, the air sweeter. I am beyond caring about appearances at this point in my life. The only thing I care about is my peace. I ended the call with a vague assurance that I would be in touch when I was ready. Ready. The word felt powerful and alien on my tongue. For decades, I had defined ready as meeting the expectations of Arthur, and then Dominic. Now, ready meant acting on my own time, on my own terms. After hanging up, I sat for a long time, the remnants of my coffee cooling in the china cup. The confrontation had confirmed Arthur's concerns. Dominic wasn't worried about my welfare. He was worried about lost assets. He saw a small discrepancy in the ledgers, a whisper of wealth, and his ambition was instantly ignited. The question Arthur had posed in his letter loomed larger with each passing moment. Had Dominic proven himself worthy of sharing in this unexpected wealth? So far, his actions, the eviction, the dismissive tone, the immediate hunt for hidden money, had only reinforced his father's profound concerns about his character and entitlement. He had already failed the initial silent test, but I still felt the echo of the boy I remembered, the sensitive, thoughtful teenager who used to bring me wildflowers from the park. Was he still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of corporate ambition and financial entitlement? I desperately hoped so, but hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. I needed proof. Arthur had given me the power to wait for the evidence to emerge, and that power felt like a balm to my long-wounded spirit. Over the next few days, my routine deepened. Mornings were for processing. Afternoons were for preparation. I met again with Attorney Madison in her sun-drenched Monterey office. Her cool professional demeanor was exactly what I needed. We reviewed the quarterly statements for the various trusts Arthur had established, the income properties, the bond portfolios, the tax structures of the car collection. "Your husband was unusually thorough, Mrs. Vance," Madison remarked, reviewing the complex flowchart of assets. "Most clients focus primarily on accumulation. Arthur was equally concerned with creating systems for management that wouldn't burden you unless you desired the involvement." He knew I didn't have his head for financial intricacies, I admitted, a slight sad smile touching my lips. Madison returned the smile. "He mentioned that. But he also said you had excellent judgment about people, and an intuitive understanding of value that he respected enormously. He built this entire structure around the certainty that you would make the right decisions when the time came." This small glimpse into how Arthur had spoken about me to others, this deep-seated faith in my capabilities, was unexpectedly moving, strengthening my resolve. "There is one matter we should discuss," Madison continued, her tone shifting to crisp professionalism. "We have received inquiries from a Dominic Vance, claiming to be conducting a thorough review of his late father's financial affairs." My hands tensed, gripping the edge of my teacup. "My son, what exactly did he want to know?" "He was fishing. Specifically, asking for information about additional accounts or investments not covered in the public will reading. The same cryptic assets he mentioned to you." I followed protocol, of course. I politely explained that client confidentiality prevents me from discussing any accounts without proper authorization, which he does not possess. "Thank you, Attorney Madison," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. Dominic received his inheritance as specified in the will. Arthur's intentions regarding the rest were quite clear. I want to honor them. "We will continue maintaining that position, Mrs. Vance, but you should be aware, he's been persistent. He's contacted at least 3 other firms associated with Arthur's investments. He's looking for the scent of money, and he's closing in on the perimeter." This wasn't surprising. Dominic had always been tenacious when pursuing a goal, a quality that made him successful in business, but manifested as entitlement and obsession in personal matters. His belief that he deserved access to all of Arthur's wealth, regardless of the will, was the central flaw Arthur had sought to counteract. I spent the drive back to the Monterey coastal retreat contemplating the reality of Dominic's investigation. His suspicions, initially vague, were now solidifying into active, targeted pursuit. He wouldn't stop. He was too proud, too entitled. How long before he connected the dots? Before he found the deed to the warehouse in the city records, and then the cottage? Before he realized the true, staggering extent of what Arthur had kept from him? And when he did, what would I do? The cottage provided the shelter I needed. Arthur had not just given me wealth. He had given me time. Time to evolve from a grieving widow to a decision-maker. Time to watch my son and finally determine his true worth. I was still pondering these heavy questions, the questions of wealth, character, and maternal duty, when I pulled my discreet sedan up the gravel drive of the Monterey coastal retreat. The late afternoon sunlight cast long, dramatic shadows across the facade of the house, and the scent of damp coastal pine was sharp in the air. My breath hitched. Parked outside my sanctuary was an unfamiliar, charcoal gray luxury SUV. It was far too large and imposing for the quiet neighborhood. A machine built for the frantic rush of city life, not the slow rhythm of the coast. My heart sank instantly, a cold, painful realization hitting me like a physical blow. The personalized license plate, a distinctive block-lettered monogram I knew too well, confirmed my worst fear. D. Vance. He had found me. Dominic Vance stood on my doorstep. His arms were crossed over his chest, his posture radiating a mixture of grim triumph and outright accusation. He was dressed, as always, impeccably, a sharp contrast to the casual, faded elegance of the coastal setting. He looked like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. As I approached the driveway, his gaze locked onto mine. He didn't move. He didn't offer a greeting. "Found you," he said, the two words delivered with a sneer that confirmed his victory. "Interesting little place you've got here, Mom. Very private. When were you planning to mention that you were suddenly a property owner in one of California's most expensive coastal towns?" My pulse was racing, a frantic drumbeat in my ears, but I forced my expression to remain calm, utterly unfazed. This was the moment of truth. I couldn't afford to be the weeping, vulnerable woman he expected. I had to be Eleanor Vance, trustee of the Arthur Vance estate. "Hello, Dominic," I said, stepping past him to the front door. I unlocked it deliberately, slowly, not rushing for his benefit. "This is certainly a surprise." "I bet it is," he retorted, glancing pointedly from my face to the quaint cedar-shingled house. His eyes were already calculating its probable market value, mentally filing the location as an asset he hadn't yet factored into his entitlement ledger. "I think you'd better come in," I suggested, gesturing him inside. There was no point in creating a scene for the neighbors. This was a private matter of betrayal and confrontation, and it needed a closed setting. Dominic followed me into the living room, his critical, hyper-analytical gaze sweeping across every detail: the custom bookshelves, the antique nautical charts Arthur had framed, the comfortable, deep-seated linen sofa. I could almost hear the click of his mind, measuring the cottage's worth against his expectations, finding it lacking in grandiosity yet maddeningly valuable. "Charming," he pronounced, the word rendered instantly insulting by his tone. He made charming sound like a synonym for deceptive. "So this is why you've been dodging my calls. You've been hiding out in a secret vacation home while I'm tearing the penthouse apart trying to find Dad's missing financial records." I placed my purse down on the small, sturdy mahogany console Arthur had built years ago and turned to face him directly. I met his eyes, allowing no flicker of fear or guilt to register. "I haven't been hiding, Dominic," I corrected him, my voice level and firm. "I've been processing enormous, life-altering changes and deciding how to move forward. Your behavior after the will reading made it clear that I needed this space to do that without external interference." He recoiled slightly at the directness of the accusation, but quickly recovered, his lips twisting into a cold, humorless smile. "How did you find this place, Dominic?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "I'm not completely incompetent, Mom," he boasted, puffing out his chest slightly. "When you vanished, I hired a private investigator to locate you. A basic welfare check, naturally. Just ensuring my elderly parent hadn't experienced a mental break after her husband's death and was wandering the streets, confused by the shock of being left nothing but a derelict shed, the calculated manipulation in his delivery, the way he recast my departure as a sign of my own senility to justify his invasive investigation, struck me not as a physical blow, but as a confirmation of Arthur's judgment. He was using my vulnerability as a weapon. "I see," I replied, the ice in my voice thick enough to skate on. "And this investigator tracked me here. After some effort, I presume." "Yes," he confirmed, enjoying the moment of superiority. "The property records were interesting reading. It seems Dad purchased this place 4 years ago, but kept it entirely out of his regular estate filings. Made me wonder what else he might have hidden." I moved toward the small galley kitchen, a deliberate action to buy myself time and create a subtle physical barrier. I reached for the kettle, intending to make tea, a gesture of normalcy in an utterly abnormal situation. Arthur made his decisions about the will for his own reasons, Dominic, I said, my back to him. The cottage, like the rest of the assets, was meant to be a private arrangement. Dominic followed me, leaning against the door frame, his presence filling the small space with volatile energy. A private arrangement, he repeated flatly, the sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Like that utterly worthless warehouse in the industrial district. Another one of Dad's little surprises. My hand stilled on the kettle, a sudden tremor running through me. He knew about the warehouse. The true test had just begun. The question was, how much did he know about what it contained? The warehouse was part of his estate, yes, I said, keeping my hands busy, turning on the tap to fill the kettle. The small, mundane action helped anchor me in the moment, preventing the tidal wave of panic I felt rising. I needed to sound calm, matter of fact. It was listed after all. Yes, the mysterious warehouse that no one could explain. Not even Attorney Thompson knew its purpose, Dominic said, his voice hardening, growing louder. I visited it yesterday, Mom. My spine stiffened. I had expected this. I had told Attorney Madison to expect it. The door was locked, of course. But the windows, while dirty, still allowed a peek inside when the light was just right. I spent 20 minutes looking, Mom. 20 minutes of my valuable time. And I saw enough. I moved the kettle to the stove burner, the hiss of the gas a brief distraction. And what exactly did you see, Dominic? His jaw tightened, the muscle twitching with barely contained fury. I saw cars in there. Not just cars, but shapes that looked remarkably like vintage cars. From the little I could make out through the grime, they were models worth significantly more than that glorified shoebox of a penthouse Dad left me. There it was. He had seen the shadows, the silhouettes, and his mind, trained in the brutal mathematics of valuation, had instantly assigned a breathtaking price tag to them. He had discovered a painful sliver of the truth, but not yet its full, complex extent. The penthouse, he continued, his voice rising. That comes with maintenance fees I can barely afford since most of the liquid assets went into those untouchable trust funds I can't access. Your father made his choices, Dominic, I stated, turning around, meeting his gaze with a look that dared him to challenge Arthur's wisdom. The penthouse and the multi-million-dollar investment portfolio he left you are substantial gifts. The will was public, legitimate, and settled. Gifts? He scoffed, his anger peaking. He threw his hands up in a gesture of outraged disbelief. The penthouse needs hundreds of thousands in repairs that I only discovered after starting the renovations. The building's plumbing is antique. The investment portfolio barely covers my existing commitments and interest payments on my failed venture, which I had to liquidate prematurely because of Dad's messy asset allocation. He was spiraling, the reality of his own poor management decisions colliding with the vision of the classic cars he believed were his, locked away in my useless warehouse. He saw himself as the victim of a conspiracy. Meanwhile, he spat, leaning toward me, his face drawn and pale with fury. You're hiding out in a charming coastal retreat and apparently own a secret collection of classic cars worth God knows how much. Tell me the truth, Mom. Did you know about all these secret assets all along? Were you and Dad planning this manipulation of the inheritance to cheat me? The directness of the accusation was stunning. He didn't just think Arthur was secretive. He thought I was a co-conspirator, a master manipulator who had been playing the role of the devoted, clueless wife for decades. The profound irony of that notion stung more than his previous insults. I poured boiling water into the teapot, the delicate, familiar ritual of tea-making steadying my nerves once again. I needed a moment to choose my words carefully. The truth, in measured doses, was my most potent weapon. No, Dominic, I said firmly, meeting his gaze with unblinking conviction. I knew nothing about the cottage or the garage until after Arthur died. I was as surprised as you are now. The will, the letter, the location of this house, all of it came as a complete shock to me. This admission seemed to catch him entirely off guard. His accusatory posture deflated slightly. He blinked, the calculation in his eyes momentarily replaced by confusion. Then why keep it from me these past weeks? Why disappear instead of explaining the moment you found out? Because I needed time to understand it myself, I answered honestly, finally allowing a hint of weariness to creep into my voice. And because your behavior after the will reading, your immediate rush to evict me, your utter lack of compassion, didn't exactly invite confidence or collaboration. He flinched this time, a genuine involuntary movement of shame. He quickly masked it with renewed indignation. I was upset, finding out Dad had essentially disinherited me in favor of you. That would make anyone react badly. Disinherited you? I interrupted, disbelief coloring my voice. He left you a multi-million-dollar penthouse and investment accounts worth millions more. Not a fraction, a significant fortune, but a fraction of what he apparently had hidden away. His voice rose again, becoming hysterical. Those cars alone are worth— What, Mom? How would you know their value unless you've been investigating far more thoroughly than you're admitting? He had the grace to look momentarily abashed. I have contacts in the collector car world, he muttered, avoiding my eye. I made some discreet inquiries based on what little I could see through the windows. Of course you did, I murmured, the simple acknowledgement carrying the weight of all my disappointment. I placed the teapot on the table between us. Would you like some tea? If we're going to have this painful conversation, we might as well be civilized about it. This mundane, motherly offer seemed to deflate some of his righteous anger. He nodded resignedly, taking a seat at the breakfast nook while I prepared 2 cups. As we sat facing each other, divided by the small table and the steam rising from the tea, I looked into his eyes. Beneath the entitlement and the raw, demanding greed, I saw a flicker of something else. Something vulnerable. Rejection. We sat in the quiet of the small kitchen, the sound of the Pacific waves rolling onto the shore a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the turmoil brewing between us. The ceramic teacups felt warm and grounding in my hands. Dominic stared into his tea, refusing to meet my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the face of the young boy I used to tuck in at night, the child who was eager for approval and terrified of failure. I decided to forgo diplomacy. It was time for a surgeon's cut. Dominic, I began, my tone gentler, the maternal instinct overriding the righteous anger I felt. Why does this matter so much to you? You have a successful career, a beautiful home, or at least you did, financial security most people only dream of. What difference does it make if Arthur left an additional, separate set of assets to me? He didn't look up. It's not about the money, he mumbled, his voice tight, the admission startlingly raw. Not really. Then what is it about, son? When he finally raised his head, I glimpsed it clearly, the deep, throbbing wound. The insecurity that had been fueling his ambition for years. It's about what it means, he whispered, the loudness of his previous rage utterly gone, replaced by the profound quiet of true pain. Dad trusted you with these assets, these enormous secrets. He gave you the power. He didn't trust me. And there it was, the heart of the matter. The financial loss was secondary. The lack of faith from his father was the true source of his pain. In his mind, Arthur's careful, meticulous planning represented not my protection, but his own irreversible rejection. He wasn't consumed by greed. He was consumed by the agony of feeling inadequate in his father's eyes. Oh, Dominic, I sighed, the sound escaping me involuntarily. It wasn't about trust or lack thereof in the simplistic way you're framing it. Your father was trying to create security for both of us, but in different ways. By hiding millions in assets from me? His bitterness returned instantly, rising like acid. By leaving you secretly wealthy, while making it seem like he'd left you nothing but a joke of a warehouse and a small coastal shack? It's a calculated insult, Mom. I took a careful sip of tea, considering the geometry of the situation. The moment had come sooner than I had expected, forcing a decision I wasn't fully prepared to make. I had to reveal Arthur's full purpose. I had to show Dominic the letter. You need to understand, Dominic, that Arthur did not act out of spite. He acted out of a genuine, overriding need to protect me from the market forces, yes, but also from your ambition. My ambition saved his company dozens of times. He flared. Your ambition, I corrected gently, is what fueled your drive to evict me the moment he was gone. Your ambition is what blinds you to the fact that you already have immense wealth. Your ambition is what led you to hire a private investigator to cast me as a senile, lost old woman, merely so you could find a deed. His eyes dropped again, unable to hold my steady gaze. The heat of the truth was too much. Arthur's will, I continued, was not a final judgment. It was a final opportunity. A test, as he called it. The letter explains it all, far more clearly than I ever could. Dominic's posture stiffened instantly, every ounce of vulnerability vanishing, replaced by suspicion. A letter? You've had a letter explaining all this manipulation, and you didn't think to share it? You chose to disappear and watch me flounder. It was addressed to me, Dominic, I said, my tone hardening slightly, reminding him of his transgressions. And given how you treated me right after the will reading, you called me useless and threw me out of my home, I wasn't exactly eager to share something so personal. So vital with you. His eyes flickered away, a genuine flash of discomfort crossing his features. I was upset, Mom. People say things they don't mean when they're emotional. Do they? I asked quietly, leaning forward across the table. Or do moments of high emotion simply strip away the polish and reveal what's normally kept hidden? That's what Arthur wondered too. He ignored the philosophical challenge and gestured impatiently. This letter? You have it here? Let me see it. I rose and went to the desk I had set up in the study, retrieving the meticulously folded copy I had made, keeping Arthur's original safe. Returning to the kitchen, I hesitated before handing him the paper. Before you read this, I want you to understand one thing, Dominic. Your father loved you. Nothing in his actions was meant to hurt you, only to protect what he valued, our future and my security. Let me be the judge of that, he replied. Snatching the letter with poorly concealed eagerness, I watched him as he read, a strange, terrifying mixture of motherly love and strategic observation filling me. I watched the progression of emotions on his face, anticipation, disbelief, then a terrible, profound anger. His hands tightened on the paper, the knuckles whitening as he reached the paragraphs detailing Arthur's concerns about his character. The moment of reckoning, years in the making, had finally arrived. When Dominic finished reading the letter, he didn't crumple it, nor did he tear it. He simply set the heavy paper down on the table with a slow, deliberate care, as if afraid the slightest sudden movement might shatter his control entirely. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with unspoken rage and humiliation. So, he finally said, his voice dangerously quiet, a low, ominous rumble. Dad thought I was what? Too materialistic? Too selfish to be trusted with the family wealth? He was running a psychological experiment on me. He was concerned about how your values had changed over time, I corrected gently, watching him like a hawk. And specifically, about how you might handle having authority over my financial well-being once he was no longer here. And his solution, Dominic began, his voice rising with each word, a crescendo of wounded pride, was to deceive me? To create this elaborate multi-million-dollar scheme making me think I got the valuable public inheritance, while secretly leaving everything of real, tangible worth to you? He stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped backward across the wooden floor with a violent, jarring sound. He was trembling. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is, Mom? How much this destroys my professional reputation? No, he cut me off, his eyes flashing with the fire of his father's temper. You don't get to Dominic me in that patronizing, soothing tone. Not after this revelation. Dad manipulated me. He tested me like some lab rat to see if I'd pass his twisted private moral examination. I remained seated, refusing to match his emotional escalation. My calm was my anchor. Your father made the best decisions he could based on what he observed over years, Dominic, not days or weeks. If his assessment seems harsh, perhaps that deserves reflection rather than automatic rejection. He began to pace the small kitchen, his movements erratic, radiating a powerful, destructive tension. Reflection? You want me to reflect on being portrayed as some kind of heartless monster in my own father's final words? I'm supposed to meditate on that? That's not what the letter says, I pointed out, my voice clear and unwavering. It expresses concern about certain tendencies, your focus on acquisition, your lack of patience, not a fixed judgment of your entire character. Arthur never stopped hoping you would prove him wrong. He stopped pacing and stared at me, the disbelief in his expression absolute. Are you seriously defending this? He left you a hidden fortune while setting me up to reveal my true nature. And apparently, I failed his test spectacularly by daring to expect to actually receive what the public will specify. There was no point in arguing with his characterization. In a sense, he wasn't wrong. Arthur had indeed engineered a situation designed to reveal character through action. And Dominic's actions after the will reading, the immediate eviction, the contempt, the financial hunger, had confirmed, rather than disproved, his father's deepest fears. The question now, I said carefully, looking straight into his agitated eyes, is where we go from here. He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound devoid of any humor. Where we go? That's simple, Mother. As Arthur Vance's only son and heir, I have every right to contest this entire arrangement. Hidden assets, secret trusts, undisclosed beneficiaries. It all smacks of a deliberate attempt to circumvent normal inheritance laws. It's a textbook case of bad faith. I had anticipated this reaction. It was the only playbook he knew. The legal structures your father created are impeccable, Dominic, I stated with absolute certainty, the confidence Attorney Madison had instilled in me pouring into my voice. The assets were his to distribute as he saw fit, and he did so through perfectly proper, documented, and legitimate channels. Contesting this would be expensive, lengthy, and almost certainly futile. He leaned forward, bracing his hands against the kitchen counter, his face close to mine. You sound awfully confident for someone who, just moments ago, claimed to know nothing about finances. I've had several weeks to consult with excellent advisors, Dominic, I replied evenly. The same excellent advisors who helped your father structure these arrangements. For a long moment, he remained hunched over the counter, his back to me. His anger seemed to be morphing, cooling from volcanic rage into something far more dangerous, calculation. When he finally turned around, the familiar, shrewd expression I had seen him use in business negotiations settled onto his face. The wounded boy was gone. The corporate shark was back. What if we reached a compromise? He suggested, his tone deliberately reasonable, smooth as polished glass. A more equitable distribution that honors Dad's wishes while acknowledging my position as his son. Surely half of these assets, the cars, the properties— No, I interrupted, my own voice surprisingly firm, shocking even myself with its finality. I was no longer negotiating. I was standing guard over Arthur's legacy. I am not negotiating Arthur's final wishes. The assets he left me aren't just about money, Dominic. They represent his care, his foresight, and his desire to ensure I would never be dependent on anyone's goodwill, including yours. So that's it, Dominic said, his voice hardening once more, the attempt at calculated compromise having failed instantly. You keep everything, justified by Dad's paranoid suspicions about me. You're holding a $12 million grudge. I stood then, matching his height, meeting him eye to eye across the small breakfast nook. I needed to ensure my final, powerful message landed with clarity and force. What I choose to do with these assets going forward will depend on many factors, Dominic. But your sense of entitlement to them is certainly not helping your case. My case? He scoffed, throwing his head back in a gesture of profound mockery. So I'm on trial now too? Is that the final cruel twist? In a way, yes, I acknowledged, deciding that complete, painful honesty was now the only path left. I had to fulfill Arthur's instructions, even if it shattered the remnants of our relationship. Your father's letter explicitly gave me discretion about sharing these assets with you or allowing you access to them, if and when you demonstrated certain qualities. Qualities of character, generosity, respect. I paused, letting the weight of the next sentence settle between us. Your behavior since his death, Dominic, particularly your callous disrespect toward me, will absolutely influence those decisions. The blunt assessment landed like a physical blow. He stared at me as if I were a complete stranger, a woman he had never met before. Perhaps in a sense, he hadn't. The compliant, accommodating, often ignored mother he had always taken for granted had been replaced by someone with clear boundaries, iron will, and overwhelming financial power. "You can't be serious," he finally managed, his voice a disbelieving gasp. "You're actually going to hold Dad's fortune hostage based on whether I passed some subjective, arbitrary character assessment. This is emotional blackmail. I am going to honor the spirit of your father's wishes," I corrected, my voice ringing with certainty, which included protecting these assets from being squandered or misused by an individual who demonstrated questionable judgment, both financially and personally. He grabbed his car keys from the table. The metallic clatter a loud rupture in the tense atmosphere. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot. I will consult my own attorneys. I will find a way to break these trusts." "Dominic," I called after him as he headed for the door, my voice softening just a fraction, a final despairing maternal plea. "Before you rush off to launch an expensive, pointless lawsuit, consider something Arthur wrote. What if this initial inheritance, the visible, prestigious, but financially burdensome part, was exactly what you needed to recognize certain truths about yourself? What if it was designed to show you that status alone does not equal security?" He paused at the threshold, his shoulders stiff, not turning back to face me. "Save the philosophical lessons, Mom," he said, his voice cold and flat, a door slamming shut on any possible reconciliation. "I've had enough Campbell family wisdom for one day." The door slammed behind him. The sound echoed through the quiet house and down to the bluff, a harsh punctuation mark on the end of a lifetime of expectations. I sank back into my chair, the exhaustion immediate and absolute. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as Arthur had predicted. Dominic had focused entirely on what he perceived as rightfully his, demonstrating not a single shred of genuine concern for my welfare or acknowledging his past appalling behavior. He hadn't asked if I was eating, sleeping, or coping with widowhood. He had only asked, "Where is the money?" Yet beneath the raging entitlement, I had clearly glimpsed the son he once was, the deeply hurt young man who felt his father had judged him and found him wanting. That pain was undeniably real, even if his response to it was utterly toxic. I made myself a fresh cup of tea, the calming ritual a necessity, and carried it out to the garden, seeking solace in the vast, indifferent expanse of the Pacific. Arthur's letter had prepared me for Dominic's reaction, but it hadn't prepared me for the actual weight of becoming the arbiter of my son's character, of holding the final, terrifying power Arthur had entrusted to me. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, a kind, older neighbor I had briefly met walking the beach. "Saw your son leave in quite a hurry. Everything okay? I'm making lasagna if you'd like company tonight." The simple, unexpected kindness of a stranger brought fresh tears to my eyes. It was a stark contrast to the greed and cruelty of my own flesh and blood. "Company would be wonderful, Margaret," I replied. "It's been a very difficult afternoon." As I watched the sun begin its descent toward the water, casting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burning orange, I contemplated the path ahead. Dominic would inevitably consult attorneys, though any legal challenge would prove futile. The real question was Arthur's test. Would this crushing confrontation drive him further into resentment? Or would it, as his father had hoped, eventually prompt genuine reflection and growth? Either way, I had decisions to make, about the cars, the properties, and how much, if anything, to ever share with the entitled man he had become. Arthur had given me not just wealth, but a profound responsibility, a final act of faith in my judgment that both honored and severely burdened me. 3 months passed after Dominic's furious departure from the Monterey coastal retreat. Autumn had settled in with the subtle, melancholic beauty of the Central Coast. Mornings were cooler, the light softer, and the fog hung thicker and lower over the bluffs. I had established a rhythm that felt increasingly natural, increasingly mine. My life was no longer reactive. It was proactive. I divided my time between the cottage, long therapeutic walks along the beach, and the management of Arthur's extraordinary legacy. Under Attorney Madison's calm, expert guidance, I had established a comfortable and effective system for overseeing the income properties and investments. I was learning the language of finance, understanding yield and leverage, finding a hidden competence I never knew I possessed. Arthur had been right. I had excellent judgment. Once I was trusted to use it. The magnificent car collection remained secured in the urban warehouse, meticulously maintained by Mr. Graham's expert team who made monthly visits. I had even driven the Aston Martin DB5 once, a tentative, exhilarating journey along a quiet stretch of the coastal highway at dawn. The sheer power and elegance of the machine left me feeling oddly close to Arthur, as if I were sharing in one of his most deeply personal joys. My communication with Dominic was reduced to a strained, almost purely transactional detente. As Madison had predicted, his initial flurry of legal inquiries about contesting the inheritance had quickly sputtered out once his attorneys confirmed the impeccable solidity of Arthur's trust arrangements. Arthur's system was a fortress. Dominic could not break it, and he knew it. His most recent communication, 2 weeks prior, had been coldly professional. A formal email requesting access to specific family photographs and documents, with no personal inquiry whatsoever about my welfare, no apology, no acknowledgement of his past behavior. Just demands veiled as administrative needs. I was pruning a particularly stubborn patch of climbing roses in the front garden, enjoying the crisp air and the physical labor when a car I didn't recognize pulled up. It was a sleek, dark sedan, conservative and expensive. A woman emerged, tall, professionally dressed, carrying the air of brisk, efficient competence common to high-level executives. She walked toward me with purpose, a business card already extended. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice smooth and modulated. "I'm Diane Reeves, Dominic's executive assistant. May I speak with you briefly?" Something in her demeanor, a subtle tension beneath the professional veneer, an urgent anxiety, sent a ripple of genuine concern through me. This was not a social call. This was an emergency signal. "Of course, Ms. Reeves," I replied, wiping my hands on my gardening gloves. "Is everything all right?" She glanced around, assessing the privacy of the garden. "Perhaps we could speak inside, Mrs. Vance." In the cottage living room, Diane perched tensely on the edge of the linen sofa, politely declining my offer of tea. She held a slim black portfolio, which looked heavy with bad news. "Mrs. Vance," she began, her tone formal and serious. "I am here because Dominic has experienced some significant setbacks. He asked me to speak with you directly as he felt you might not take his call." "Setbacks?" I asked, though the sinking feeling in my chest suggested I already knew the nature of them. "Financial ones primarily," she confirmed, opening the portfolio. The renovation costs on the penthouse exceeded estimates by nearly double. There were structural issues with the aging infrastructure that simply couldn't have been anticipated, requiring substantial, unplanned additional investment. I nodded, utterly unsurprised. Arthur had mentioned the building's infrastructure years ago, suggesting preventative maintenance which Dominic had dismissed as an unnecessary expense. The apple, indeed, had fallen far from the tree of foresight. Simultaneously, Diane continued, her voice maintaining its professional cadence. Dominic's primary investment, a major commitment to a development project, failed. The project encountered regulatory and environmental obstacles that were not disclosed in the initial site assessment. The details are complex, but essentially he is facing significant losses with limited liquid assets left to cover them. I saw the dominoes fall, exactly as Arthur had predicted in his letter. Dominic, always preferring aggressive, dramatic gains over steady conservative growth, had overextended himself based on pure hubris. "And how does this concern me, Ms. Reeves?" I asked, keeping my expression neutral. Diane shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my direct gaze. She had clearly been tasked with the most difficult conversation of her career. "Mrs. Vance, to be blunt, Dominic is now facing potential foreclosure on the penthouse. The renovation loans used the property as collateral, and with the investment failure, he cannot meet the payment schedule. He needs immediate intervention. There it was. The inevitable culmination of his own arrogance. The request I had been anticipating since the first confrontation 3 months ago. Not an apology. Not a plea for reconciliation. Not a confession. But a direct, calculated financial appeal, delivered through an intermediary to save him the humiliation of asking directly. "Has Dominic considered selling the penthouse?" I asked Diane, my voice steady, betraying none of the complex mixture of emotions swirling within me. Part of me felt a cold, vindictive sense of justice for the way he had treated me. Another part felt the deep, familiar ache of a mother watching her child crash and burn. Even partially renovated, a New York penthouse of that size would likely cover his debts. Diane sighed, a small, weary sound that broke through her professional composure. "He has explored that option, Mrs. Vance, extensively. Unfortunately, in its current state, mid-renovation, gutted to the studs in many key areas, the property would sell at a significant loss. Additionally, there are complicating factors regarding the payment schedule and legal disputes with some of the contractors. Translation: Dominic had likely alienated the construction team through demanding behavior, payment delays, or sheer arrogance, creating additional legal and financial obstacles to a quick sale. He hadn't just made poor financial decisions. He had made poor human decisions. "I appreciate you coming to explain the situation so clearly, Ms. Reeves," I said after a long, reflective moment. "Please tell Dominic I have heard his request and I will consider it." Diane looked visibly startled by the non-committal, measured response. She had clearly expected an immediate, emotional reaction, a mother rushing to save her son. "Mrs. Vance, the situation is quite urgent," she pressed, her voice edged with genuine alarm. "The foreclosure proceedings could begin within weeks. This is a complete professional and financial crisis for him." "I understand the urgency, Ms. Reeves," I replied, my tone firm but not unkind, "and I will need time to consider my response based on the full scope of the information. That is all I can offer today." After showing the clearly dissatisfied assistant out, I returned to the living room, the quiet of the house now filled with the profound echo of Dominic's failure. Arthur's letter seemed almost prophetic now. He had anticipated that Dominic's high-risk financial decisions and inflated sense of security might eventually lead to exactly this kind of crisis, creating the very scenario where I would hold all the power and all the solutions. The next morning, rather than calling Dominic or his assistant immediately, I drove back to the city. I needed to see the situation for myself. I needed empirical evidence of the damage. I had to understand the true cost of his hubris before making a decision that would alter both our lives forever. I drove the anonymous sedan directly to the familiar, magnificent building. The doorman, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Ramirez who recognized me instantly from my years living there, allowed me up without calling ahead. He seemed sympathetic, his eyes wide with a silent knowledge of the chaos upstairs. What I found was sobering, far worse than Diane Reeves's carefully worded report had suggested. The once elegant penthouse, which had been the backdrop of my entire adult life, was a war zone. It had been brutally, extensively gutted to the studs in most areas. Exposed wiring hung like grotesque metallic vines from the ceiling joists. Plumbing lay open and disconnected. The air was thick with gypsum dust and the acrid smell of old materials. It was a hazardous maze of demolition. Construction equipment, saws, heavy drills, buckets, sat abandoned, a fine, undisturbed layer of dust covering everything, suggesting weeks, perhaps months had passed since any work had been done. Expensive marble tiles, custom cabinetry, and what looked like irreplaceable antique fixtures were stacked haphazardly in the main salon, some already damaged from improper storage or exposure. As I carefully picked my way through the wreckage of what had been my home, I felt a complex, swirling mixture of emotions. Sadness for the destruction of spaces that held such deep, irreplaceable memories, frustration at the obvious waste and profound mismanagement, and an unexpected, almost overwhelming sense of gratitude for Arthur's foresight in protecting me from ever having to depend on Dominic's flawed financial judgment. I walked through the skeletal framework of the master bedroom, where I had slept beside Arthur for over 40 years. The room was now cold, exposed, and desolate. I was examining a massive patch of water damage extending from where the master bathroom used to be, now just a concrete slab, when I heard the unmistakable sound of the main door being pushed open. "Mom?" Dominic's voice echoed through the vast, empty space, instantly recognizable but carrying a new, rough edge. "Mr. Ramirez downstairs said you were here. Why are you here?" He appeared in the doorway of what had been the library, and I was struck by how drastically different he looked from our last encounter 3 months ago. His normally immaculate high-gloss appearance had completely slipped. His clothes were still expensive, a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, but they were rumpled, stained with dust, and carelessly worn. His face was drawn and pale, showing the deep strain of sleepless nights and grinding anxiety. He had lost weight, the sharp angles of his face emphasizing how much. In this moment of vulnerability, he resembled Arthur in his most difficult, stressed moments. I took one more look around the wreckage of the penthouse, at the visible, terrifying evidence of his failure, and turned to face my defeated son. "I wanted to see it for myself," I explained, gesturing with my gloved hand to the surrounding demolition, the exposed girders, and the hanging debris that were once the ceiling of our comfortable home. "Diane spoke with me yesterday. She explained your financial situation, the single word, situation, hung in the dust-filled air, carrying a palpable weight of unspoken disaster and his shame." Dominic ran a trembling hand through his hair, a gesture of deep, profound frustration I recognized from his childhood. Whenever he faced a problem he couldn't immediately solve with sheer willpower. "And you needed to understand the full picture before making any decisions," he finished for me, the words heavy with resignation. I carefully stepped around a large, discarded pile of ruined plasterboard and met his gaze, which was laced with a desperate kind of exhaustion. "This is quite different from what you described when you triumphantly started the renovations, Dominic. You boasted of maximizing value. This looks like total destruction." He gave a short, humorless, almost broken laugh. "Yes. Well, things rarely go as planned in construction, Mom, or in life." "What happened with the investment project?" I asked, my tone gentle, not accusatory. I wanted the truth, not a performance of remorse. Diane mentioned environmental review. That sounds permanent. Something in my tone, perhaps the complete lack of judgment, the genuine maternal inquiry, must have broken through his defensive posture. He didn't meet my eyes. He sank down onto an overturned, paint-splattered bucket, instantly looking smaller, utterly defeated, and exhausted. "I overextended," he admitted, the 2 words a confession of the deepest professional sin. The development opportunity seemed guaranteed. Ultra-luxury condos in an up-and-coming area. Pre-construction sales were already strong. I committed not just available capital, but I borrowed against other assets, including the anticipated increased value of the penthouse after renovations. He looked up at the broken ceiling, as if tracing the catastrophic chain of events that had unfolded over his head. And then the environmental review found contamination issues that weren't disclosed in the initial site assessment. Heavy contamination. Remediation costs made the project non-viable. Investors pulled out immediately. He gestured vaguely to the chaotic room. The domino effect was comprehensive. The construction loans immediately entered default, triggered by the loss of the collateral value. And now, this. I looked around at the destruction surrounding us, the physical demolition of the penthouse and the wreckage of Dominic's meticulously constructed financial stability. It was a perfect, terrifying metaphor for the collapse of his life. "Why didn't you reach out sooner, Dominic?" I asked, the mother in me asking the question that hurt the most. "Before things reached this point? Before you faced foreclosure? Why send your assistant?" His expression hardened again, the shield of pride instinctively snapping back into place. "After our last conversation, after discovering Dad's manipulation and your role in it, I suppose it was pride. Or stubbornness. The typical Vance family stubbornness. He didn't mention the part where I had told him he was on a test, or the part where I had warned him about his entitlement. He simply framed it as stubbornness. Still, it was a step toward owning his isolation. Your father's actions were not manipulation, Dominic. I corrected him gently, knowing this was the final wall I had to dismantle. They were a desperate, loving act of protection. He shook his head, looking away. Protection that led to my financial ruin. Protection that left me with an asset, this penthouse, that is now worth less than the debt I owe on it. This is Arthur's fault. If he had simply left me the estate openly, I would never have had to resort to such high-risk leveraging. Arthur left you a substantial, functioning fortune, I countered. The penthouse became a liability because of your choices. You chose to gut a functioning home immediately. You chose to ignore the underlying structural issues. You chose the most aggressive, most fragile investment strategy possible, leveraging everything against a single speculative venture. That was not Arthur's choice, Dominic. That was yours. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was the silence of a man facing the consequences of his own hubris, a silence that finally had no room for blaming others. I looked at the state of my old home, the water damage, the dust, the abandoned tools. I thought about the sheer volume of resources Arthur had secreted away to protect me, and the speed and totality with which Dominic had managed to destroy the inheritance Arthur had entrusted to him. You need help. Dominic, I finally said, moving closer to him, speaking not as the trustee of Arthur's fortune, but as his mother. But I need to know why I should help you. Why should I use the resources Arthur protected so carefully to bail you out of a crisis that was completely and predictably of your own making? He looked up at me then, his eyes brimming with a raw, panicked desperation. Because I'm your son, Mom. Because I'm the only family you have left. That's not good enough, Dominic, I said, my voice heavy with the weight of 4 decades of motherhood. It never was. You need to give me a reason that has nothing to do with birthright and everything to do with character. The final confrontation was upon us, held in the ruins of the life we had shared, demanding a confession of soul that he had never before been willing to make. Dominic, still seated on the overturned bucket, stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant in the dusty light filtering through the grime-caked windows. He had thrown everything he had at me: entitlement, accusation, legal threats, and finally, the pathetic plea of a desperate son. But I needed the one thing he hadn't offered: accountability. You talk about character, Mom, he rasped, his voice sounding dry and brittle. But you're demanding a performance. You want me to admit I'm a failure just so you can reward me. No, I corrected, shaking my head slowly. I'm asking you to recognize the difference between ambition and greed. Arthur feared the moment your ambition would outstrip your prudence, and that your focus on value would destroy your capacity for respect. You've proven him tragically right. I gestured around the shattered room. This penthouse wasn't just an asset, Dominic. It was your home. You tore it apart immediately to maximize its potential gain, ignoring the risks, ignoring the maintenance. You did the same to your life. You focused so intensely on the next biggest score that you destroyed the foundation you already had. His desperate, brittle facade finally cracked. He buried his face in his hands, the sound of his ragged breathing echoing in the vast, empty space. I was trying to prove him wrong, Mom. I was trying to prove I deserved it, that I could manage the wealth. I thought if I made this one massive success, he would finally see me as his equal, not just a liability. The raw, childlike confession of his core wound, the desperate need for his father's validation, hit me with an unexpected force of grief. This was the vulnerable boy I had been looking for. Arthur already saw you as his son, Dominic. His purpose was to protect me, not to punish you. But in doing so, he created a mirror that forces you to look at yourself without the shield of wealth. I knelt in the dust before him, ignoring the grit on my expensive trousers. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the final, terrifying moment of Arthur's test. If I help you now, Dominic, if I pay off these loans, if I save the penthouse, you will not see it as a gift. You will see it as your right, a momentary inconvenience corrected by your mother's vast secret wealth. You will learn nothing, He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, pleading. Then what, Mom? Foreclosure? Bankruptcy? Is that the lesson? The lesson, I said, rising slowly, regaining my posture as the trustee, the arbiter, is that you must salvage what you have left with the resources Arthur did leave you. You must stop waiting for a rescue. You must stop blaming your father's foresight for your own failure. You must sell this ruin. You must pay your debts. You must restart your life from a place of humility, not entitlement. I pulled a single folded business card from my pocket and placed it on the arm of his cashmere sweater. Attorney Madison's card. I will not bail you out of this debt, but I will do this. Attorney Madison has the resources to handle the complex sale of this property for you. She will ensure every contractor is paid, every fine is settled, and you walk away clean with whatever meager equity remains. She will also guide you toward a more sensible, less speculative portfolio management that will secure your long-term future. This is Arthur's final gift to you, a foundation, rebuilt on prudence, not pride. Dominic looked from my face to the card, the defeat sinking in. He understood that my offer wasn't a punishment. It was a firm, uncompromising way back to solvency, but it required him to let go of the symbol of his failure, the penthouse. You're making me sell the penthouse, he whispered, a final note of despair. I am giving you the dignity of selling it yourself before the bank takes it, I corrected. Go home, Dominic. Call Madison. Start working. When you have demonstrated maturity, when you have rebuilt your life based on responsibility, then, and only then, we can discuss the future of the Vance trusts. I left him there, alone in the dust and the wreckage, the symbol of his ambition. I walked out of the building and into the sunlight, finally feeling the absolute crushing weight of Arthur's burden lift. I had passed the test. I had acted not as a forgiving mother, but as a wise steward. The next day, I was back in the peace of the Monterey coastal retreat. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Dominic. I called Madison. I accept the help. Thank you. A cold, professional thank you. No apology, but a step forward. Arthur's test had begun its long, slow work. My friends, the journey was agonizing. I was tested by the man I raised, and I was saved by the man I loved. Arthur Vance didn't just leave me a fortune. He left me a manifesto of self-worth that forced me to rise from the ashes of betrayal and confront my own son with an unwavering strength I didn't know I possessed. The most profound lesson here is this. Never be afraid to use your wisdom as your shield and your foresight as your sword. The price of entitlement is absolute destruction, but the reward for accountability is the dignity of rebuilding. If this story of heartbreak, secret wealth, and ultimate redemption moved you to tears, if it empowered you to face your own life's challenges, please hit that like button and subscribe now. Your support helps this channel share true stories of survival, transformation, and second chances. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done with Arthur's final letter?